Welcome to a Monday night edition of Tysky Sour. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. We have four kind of bizarre stories for you today. Some of them are bizarre. Anyway, working from home in the Taliban, exploding Land Rovers, mansions in Marbella, and His Royal Highness Prince Andrew. So some of them are bizarre, some of them just outright kind of nasty. I'm joined today by Ash Sarkar. How are you doing, Ash?
I thought you were going to intro me with speaking of outright nasty here as my co-host, but you missed. It was an open goal, Michael.
I know I'm not as witty as you. It causes me really bad sleep, actually. But I'm over it.
At least you've got a jawline and I don't. So really, who's the real winner here? I think it's you.
See, that's the kind of thing I wouldn't be quick enough to think of. So thank you for making me feel better there. Let's get on to our first story, though. Before that, almost forgot to say it. Can't believe it. Do hit subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have any questions or comments, tweet them on the hashtag TyskySour or put them in the comments. Let's get straight on. In his speech to party conference last week, Boris Johnson gave this appeal to people who worked at home throughout the pandemic.
As we come out of COVID, our towns and cities are going to be buzzing with life because we know that a productive workforce needs the spur that only comes with face-to-face meetings and water cooler gossip. If young people are to learn on the job in the way that they always have and must, we will and must see people back in the office.
That was Boris Johnson pleasing the Tory faithful. This weekend, his cabinet colleagues took the threats up a gear. An unnamed senior cabinet minister has told the Mail on Sunday that home working didn't just prevent gossip being exchanged, it left Britons at the mercy of the Taliban. The claim that they're making is that vital time was lost because civil servants couldn't access the relevant documents because it was security protected, and so therefore people were not airlifted out of Kabul airport. Inside the Mail on Sunday, former Work and Pension Secretary Ian Duncan Smith invoked, you guessed it, World War II and the Blitz. That was to pressure people back to their daily commute. This is a particularly ridiculous article. It was headlined, in the 1940s they kept coming to the office even when Hitler's bombs were raining down. In the piece, IDS decries the empty tables at his favourite Italian restaurant in Whitehall and claims there can be no question that being together makes us more productive, particularly in the face of complex or seemingly intractable problems. Meanwhile, studies now suggest that social isolation during the pandemic has led to a troubling increase in depression and other forms of mental illness. For the sake of government itself, our civil servants must get back into the office after this terrible COVID hiatus. We could talk for a long time, a whole show in fact, about why IDS should not be taken seriously as an advocate for mental health. He was, of course, in charge of the DWP, the Department of Work and Pensions, at the high point of austerity, causing untold misery to people. Just one example, according to this study, his degrading fit-to-work assessments could be linked to 590 suicides. This guy should not be talking about you should go back to work because of your mental health. He does not care about your mental health. We'll talk about what he probably does care about later on in the show. First of all, while IDS's injunction to return to the office might be one of the more offensive Tory interventions, it is not the most ridiculous. That award goes to former Minister Jake Berry, who told a fringe meeting at Tory conference, we absolutely have to get the civil service back into the office. It's time to end the Whitehall working from home culture. But it really is majority woking from home. Ash, I'm going to want your broader take on this attack on people home working in a second. First of all, do you have any idea at all what Jake Berry was talking about there? What point was he trying to make?
I mean, look, in a sense, yes, Jake Berry is a blithering idiot. And what he's found is a word which neatly encapsulates all the things that the Tories don't like. I saw a meme earlier today, which is, how do you tell the difference between woke and levelling up? It's, well, do you like this thing? If not, it's woke. If you do like it, it's actually levelling up. So it's these two kind of like broad floating signifiers which operate within conservative verbiage. And it's not really meant to have any coherent political meaning. I mean, what's woke about working from home? What has that got to do with pronouns or vegan sausage rolls or, androgynous dungarees for sale at ASOS, right? Nothing. Got nothing to do with any of those things. The real threat here, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this in more detail, I think it's, threefold. One is the impact of working from home on the commercial lettings market. So in 2020, demand for commercial office space in London collapsed by 50% compared to year-on-year trends. You've also got, the kind of ripple effect of that, right? So then if you have, reduced footfall in central London because of office space, then you've also got fewer people going to Pret and all that kind of thing. So that kind of commuter-oriented economy, which also, by the way, isn't good. No one goes, oh, what's the best part of my day? It's getting like a soggy Avo wrap from Pret. People are quite happy to support their local cafe, local businesses, close to their home, and they feel really good about that kind of thing. Obviously, the minute you shift power into the hands of workers and away from rentier interests, that's a bad thing in Tory land. So why there might be a bit of lip service paid to increase flexibility, dynamic economies, blah, 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 ways of structuring a workplace, ultimately, they don't like it when workers get to shape their own conditions. All right, that's a bad thing for Tory ideology. Then the third thing is really aiming this kind of language squarely at retirees who, despite having bought their own house for £1.50 at that beautiful time when wages and property prices were just like this, they're like, life should be miserable for everybody else because I suffered also. I could barely afford their second home.
Ash, I think we both need a break, so we're going to go to another clip. As you mentioned there is an age element here, both in terms of the drive to get people back to work and who is supporting it. The Conservatives are making out that this push to get people to go back to work is to the benefit of young people. That was a claim made by Boris Johnson in that speech we showed you at the beginning, and also speaking to Nick Ferrari last week on LBC.
We are certainly encouraging people to get back to work in the normal way. And I think that's a good thing. And let me tell you why I think it's a good thing. I think that for young people in particular, it is really essential to be in if you're going to learn on the job, you can't just do it on Zoom.
No.
You've got to be able to come in and sit at the. You've got to know what everybody else is talking about.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're going to be gossiped about, and you're going to lose out. And
God forbid you'd ever be gossiped about.
Well, you know what I mean, Nick. And you need to be.
I would never partake in that. Can I assure you?
You need to be there, and you need to have the stimulus of exchange and competition.
You're not a fan of Zoom.
That was a very smug Boris Johnson speaking to a rather smug Nick Ferrari, and they were both suggesting that young people are better off in the office, Boris Johnson, because young people will be gossiped about if they continue to work from home. It turns out, however, that young people aren't particularly keen to go back into the office, and when it comes to different age groups, they are the least keen. YouGov recently polled the public on whether the government should encourage people back into their workplaces. They found that among the general population, 45% believe they shouldn't, and only 36% that they should. Opposition to any rush back to work is also particularly strong among 25 to 49-year-olds. So they back continuing to work from home by 55 to 27%, or at least don't want the government to be pushing one or the other. And it's only once you get to people who are older than working age where you see a clear majority in favour of a government campaign to get people back into the office. For people who are over 65, 47% of people want a government campaign to get people to return to their workplaces, and 36% are opposed. Ash, I think you've sort of intimated that you think this might be sort of the sadism of the British public, where people like people to be miserable so long as it's not themselves. I suppose in defence, you could say that maybe people who are over 65, they have the most experience. They're the people who know how they got by in the workplace and think they would regret it now if they hadn't had that chance to gossip at the water cooler. Which one do you think it is?
I mean, look, I'm not saying that there are absolutely no downsides to a shift towards working from home. If you're somebody who doesn't have great broadband access, or if you're somebody who lives in overcrowded housing, if working from home more means that you essentially take up more of the domestic burden than you were before, you're somebody who suffers from being isolated and that really has detrimental impact. Obviously, working from home isn't the best thing for you. But this thing about kind of castigating flexibility as itself evidence that you're work shy, it just really doesn't stand up to scrutiny. There hasn't been a massive loss of productivity with people working from home. Lots of people who are working age who are struggling because of things like the cost of travel, the cost of childcare being a massive one. They go, well, actually, overall, what this gives me is an improved standard of living rather than, just about surviving. Like maybe I can get a takeaway or something once a week and that's fucking lit. It's actively improving their lives. But like I said, I do think that particularly amongst the Tory base, there is this kind of, cultural affect, which is a complete level of delusion about one's own experiences. And I think we're going to talk about this a little bit with regards to that insane Blitz Spirit article, kind of remembering their own experiences as much more shaped by hardship than they actually were, and then saying everyone else must suffer like that because otherwise they've gone soft. Whereas really before the pandemic, and this is still the case, you tended to have younger workers who are in those frontline roles where you were actually less able to take advantage of flexible working or working from home. And it tended to be older workers, those who are at management levels, who could much more easily incorporate a degree of flexibility into their working day. So there's a kind of irony about being the most opposed to it, and before the pandemic, being of an age group which was most likely to be able to benefit from it.
Do you think, because it's often said, isn't it, that, what people really want is for their children to be better off than themselves, and that's the sort of, the dream of social mobility. And when that is stunted, people sort of say that's when you get populism and things, because people don't see their children benefiting from the system or themselves benefiting from the system. They're less, invested in it. It does seem like we're kind of seeing in contemporary British culture kind of the opposite, which is that people really resent the idea that anyone might have a better time than they did. So obviously, I think to great detriment, there's been enormous pressure for people to go to work 9 to 5 or longer for a very long period of time. Yes, it has a few upsides, but it has shed loads of downsides. We've now had a pandemic, this extraordinary global event, which meant that this routine was broken. Nearly everyone who partook in that shift to working from home wants to keep at least some of it. Very, very little demand to go back to the office 5 days a week. As you see from those polls we showed you, nearly everyone of working age, or the vast majority of people of working age, really don't want to be pushed back into the workplace. Yet the drive for it is from older people who no longer vote, but who overwhelmingly vote Conservative. So it does, it seems like a fairly frustrating block, let's say, to political change, to improving work-life balances, is people who are sort of looking at this and saying, no, we didn't get that, so you shouldn't get that either. We probably shouldn't belabor this point, because I don't think if we do get pushed back into the office, by the way, I'm clearly in my office right now, but Novara Media, we are very flexible when it comes to this. We're in and out as and when we feel we need to. Working from home, very much welcome. But as I say, I don't think old people, the elderly, people over 65, are the main drivers of this often obscene push back to the workplace, invoking the Taliban and the Blitz. As Ash mentioned earlier on, it's probably material interests which are driving this move. And in particular, the interests of commercial landlords. That's because there is no one else who would lose out more from a dramatic shift and a long-term shift to working from home than commercial landlords, people who own office space. And while that group might be numerically small, not many people own offices in city centres. They also happen to be key donors to the Tory party. The FT report that landlords provided 1/4 of funds given to the Tories since 2019, and their largest individual funder is a commercial landlord. Ash, it's a question we come back to over and over again on this show. The stranglehold that a small group of incredibly unproductive people who just lay claim to bits of land and then demand proportions of other people's income for the right to, reside there or work there. They have such an enormous grip over our politics that is really stopping, even the most moderate change. Like people say, we all overwhelmingly want a better work-life balance. The Tories have a few multi-billion pound donors who own office space near Euston, and suddenly we're all getting bullied back into the workplace.
Well, I think this is something which is really interesting about this iteration of the Conservative Party. So what they've worked out is that it's possible to produce and encourage a kind of network of images, narratives, and cultural signifiers, which can try and tie together the interests of, billionaire, the billionaire rentier class and that section of home-owning baby boomers, both in traditionally Labour constituencies and also, some in urban areas as well, and the classic kind of rural contingent of Tory voters, right? So that's the thing that they've really worked for, is how can you make that generation of homeowners essentially the electoral wing of rentier capital? And I think they've done that very well. But what it doesn't anticipate is when you have these moments of kind of historical happenstance, right? Something like a pandemic, which isn't really in anyone's control how and when that happens, is that this comes along. And what it exposes is that actually within capital, there are some competing interests. The interest of the rentier class, the people who own all of these huge property portfolios in London, in Manchester, in Edinburgh, in Birmingham, they don't have the same material interest, financial interest, as the small business owner, the person who's trying to make a startup work, the guy who runs the restaurant down the street, right? These are actually diametrically opposing interests. And that's why when we're talking about this conflict over working from home, it's not really a conflict between employers and employees. Because for lots of employers, they're thinking, what is the single most unproductive use of my revenue, right? It's rents, right? It gets higher and higher every year. I'm not actually getting more for it. And imagine what I could do if I, put that back into my business. It's a very unproductive use of capital. And what the pandemic has exposed is a sort of strange potential alliance, just in this kind of small interest between employers, employees against the rentier class. And that's why they're going so hard on, if you work from home, you're basically Al-Qaeda. What about the Blitz? They didn't go home. Yeah, because German bombs weren't contagious, you idiot. And also because you needed factories and shit for the war effort. And also, I'm not really sure what the broadband connections were like in 1941, but I imagine they're a bit patchy at best. It's entirely silly, but what it's trying to do is, again, strengthen those imaginative connections which have formed a kind of political bloc between rentier capital and home-owning baby boomers.
I mean, also there are lots of bunkers in Whitehall. I don't really buy this thing that people were at significant risk of getting bombed in those buildings, and they just went to those buildings anyway. I think that the Nazis didn't really bomb the centre of Westminster anyway, because they kind of wanted to take it over when they won. So once they invaded Britain, they wanted to use the House of Parliament.
Factories.
Exactly. It was industrial spaces, right? Mainly in East London and South London, working class parts of the city. Let's talk very briefly just about this hold that the Blitz narrative has on our politics. We might be able to get up that Ian Duncan Smith headline up just one more time, just because it's so ridiculous. So it's Ian Duncan Smith. In the 1940s, they kept coming to the office, even when Hitler's bombs were raining down. I was also reminded, not reminded, there was a very similar headline in the Times this time about the shortages. We're not going to get this one up for you. But it's Claire Foges, who always has the most ridiculous articles. And she says, we have got used to a degree of chaos during the pandemic, and many secretly enjoy the chance to show some Blitz spirit, which is her argument why we shouldn't bet on a hard winter toppling Boris Johnson. Asked you by this analysis that people were willing to go through shortages themselves, or would that sort of go against the sadistic side of British politics, which is that people only prefer, they only really like other people to suffer?
But look, one of the, I think, biggest myths in politics is that there's such a thing as rational self-interest. No, our self-interest can be destructive. It can be irrational. It can be motivated purely by emotion and vibes and feeling. It's got nothing to do with what's going on outside in the world. So I think that there is something in that. And I do think that there is quite a powerful strain within the kind of British collective unconscious, which is that, well, suffering is inevitable. So what we can do is divide that suffering into either, the suffering which ennobles us somehow, and it's usually, tying us back to an imagined past, right? One where World War II was sort of, dominated by like cheeky chappies playing about in the rubble rather than like bombs dropping on civilian areas and fucking like mass death. And saying, oh, well, the suffering's a bit like that. Or looking at other kinds of suffering, the suffering of undocumented migrants, people at Yarl's Wood, people who are recipients of welfare and have had to endure some really degrading and inhumane treatment, and going, your suffering actually marks you out as unworthy, as illegitimate, as a social parasite, something and so forth. Now, of course, this way of thinking about suffering and pain is deeply contradictory, but then again, welcome to Britain. So I do think that there's something in that, which is that there's almost this fantasy amongst, by the way, a generation who were not there for World War II. Right, who were not born even for World War II. It's like you were born in 1958, all right? You had a pretty good run of things, who keep appealing to this past where, men were men and bin men were real hard, and, the Anderson shelter in the backyard was, basically a palace. So why are you complaining about how much it costs to rent a former council house? Who keep appealing to that because it disguises their own, quite frankly, very coddled experience of the world.
We should say at this point, because I know when we do generational analysis, sometimes people quite rightly say, stop trying to tar all people born in the 50s and 60s with the same brush. And I absolutely would not want to do that. Many of our most valued supporters, most valued regular viewers are, of course, in their 50s, 60s and 70s. Some of the most passionate socialists I know are. But it just so happens that in this country right now, sort of class is in many ways articulated via age. You can see it in all polls, and it is in many ways pensioners who are keeping the Conservatives in power, which is not to blame the pensioners, it's just to say that there definitely is something going on there. Apparently we are noticing people having some problems joining the chat. I'm told if you refresh the stream, then that will become possible once again. And let's go to a comment. Oliver Kant, rich people hate it when poor people have a good time. Put that on a t-shirt. I'll tell Tom, our merch guy. I don't know if it's catchy enough for a t-shirt, but I think you're correct, nonetheless. Let's go straight on to our next story. TV star and wildlife campaigner Chris Packham has revealed that hate campaigners have blown up a Land Rover outside his home. The arsonists, who remain unidentified, drove to the presenter's front gate before setting fire to the vehicle and leaving in a getaway car. The subsequent explosion set fire to the gate and fence of Packham's property in Hampshire's New Forest. Luckily, no one was hurt. Packham explained what happened in a video he uploaded the morning after the incident.
So on Thursday night, Friday morning, 12:30, two hoodied and masked men drove a vehicle right up to my gate and set it on fire. They were fully aware of the CCTV that was in place. They took great pains to hide themselves. The car exploded and was rapidly and efficiently dealt with by Hampshire Fire and Rescue, and the police were in attendance. And as ever, they did a fantastic job, but not before it had caused extensive damage to my property. It's not the first action that we've seen here. Dead animals are a frequent occurrence. You'll remember in 2019 that dead birds were tied to the gate, dead foxes and badgers, and it's continued. Indeed, only the other day I found a dead badger thrown in front of the house. And it's got to the point that I didn't even bother to tell my partner Charlotte and stepdaughter Megan about it, because it's become normal. But as someone has pointed out to me, this is far from normal. It isn't normal to come home and find dead animals thrown in front of your property. But that's what's been happening. But now it's escalated because they've taken to damaging that property. And I wonder where it's going. I mean, what happens next? Do they burn the house down? Do they beat up my stepdaughter? Do they cut the brake lines on my partner's car? Or do they come for me directly? I mean, are they going to kill me at some point? I will, of course, just carry on, because I have no choice. I cannot and will not let your intimidation sway me from my course. And that's why I don't really understand why you would do it.
That was Chris Packham explaining what sounds like a really horrific campaign of intimidation. So who's responsible for it? Well, no arrests have been made, but Packham is clear he believes it to be the work of people opposed to his environmental campaigning. So he is quoted in the Mirror as saying, "I get up every morning and my underlying mission is to try and make the world a better place for wildlife and people. That's it. I think it's relatively straightforward. I do campaign against fox hunting because I don't think it's great for wildlife and it distresses 86% of the population. I do campaign against sustainable and illegal shooting. I do campaign about these things and I draw attention to them, but I don't burn anything down. I don't damage people's property or their livelihoods and I don't threaten them. All I do is ask them to change their mind." Ash, I want your take on this. I mean, I was sort of shocked at how extreme this was. You know, this is people who are, well, obviously we don't know. It's unconfirmed who this is, but Chris Packham seems to believe, and has very good reason to believe, that this is people who are opposed to his environmental campaigning, including, increasing regulation when it comes to shooting birds, for example. There's lots of farmers who've been pissed off by the campaign. But yeah, I mean, a Land Rover getting blown up outside his house.
I mean, it's really just dreadful and horrifying. And I don't think that Chris Packham is being alarmist or fishing for sympathy when he's saying, well, how is this going to escalate? Is this going to end up with me dead or a member of my family killed or badly hurt? Like, where is this going to stop? And unfortunately, there has been a great deal of violence and conflict when it comes to the issue of environmental campaigning, particularly in the British countryside. You've seen that with assaults and abuse of hunt saboteurs. There's something really nasty about those who want to defend blood sport, killing animals for fun because it's like a tradition or whatever in the countryside. So I think that, Chris Packham's got a real cause for concern. I hope that he's receiving as much protection as anyone can get in this kind of situation. And one thing which maybe I'd like to end my comments on is noting that despite this campaign of intimidation and harassment, which, as he said, has been going on for years, we don't really hear about it being worked into the conversation around free speech, intimidation, and harassment. So somebody like Chris Packham, who has genuine cause to fear for their safety, their car has just been blown up outside their home, doesn't seem to be the subject of like a big celebrity blue tick campaign of solidarity online. I'm not seeing evidence being presented to Parliament. I'm not seeing, the Times going out and, loads of columns being written by, Janice Turner or Matthew Dancona and all these kinds of people. It's just sort of seen as like a weird side issue, a weird fringe issue. But it seems to be a very direct example of somebody's free speech being attacked and an attempt to suppress it through a campaign of sustained intimidation and harassment.
Yeah, I do feel like, obviously it's a hypothetical, but I do feel like if there was, for example, one of these gender critical feminists who we hear so much from about cancel culture, if there was dead animals appearing on their front doorstep, which would obviously be a completely horrific horror. No one should get dead animals on their doorstep, by the way. But I imagine if that was happening, that would provoke far more Times comment pieces and sort of big spreads in the Sunday Times than this happening to Chris Packham, because it's absolutely. Well, solidarity with Chris Packham, and let's hope the bastards get caught. I want to go to a couple of comments. Saul with a £5. Big solidarity with Seamus Milne, Carrie Murphy, Georgie Robertson, Harry Hable and Laura Murray, the latest targets of the Labour right leadership. That's an important reference to a story which has just broken on Labour List concerning the Labour leaks. As you'll know, we covered the Labour leaks extensively. They showed, the bullying that was going on within the Labour Party, what many people consider racism targeted against black left-wing MPs, and then also, the sitting on anti-Semitism complaints done by right-wing bureaucrats. And, I think it's fairly corrupt, actually, what was revealed in there, because it is people who had a job to try and get the Labour Party elected, and they clearly were more interested in doing something else. That was revealed. Left-wing members of the Labour Party were outraged. And I suppose, any member should have been outraged who cares about Labour winning elections. The response of the leadership was to start the Ford report, which has now, seems to have been mothballed, and to try and target the people who wrote it and or leaked it. We don't know who wrote it and or leaked it, but they are now naming 5 people who they believe to be responsible. I've just read you names there. The response from these 5 is to say there is no evidence of this. The Labour Party has admitted that any suspicions are all anecdotal, but Labour want to now put these 5 names out. But, it seems to me so as to scapegoat them, because Labour has no interest whatsoever in properly investigating what was revealed in that report. We said at the time, in terms of the leak, in an ideal world, some of the names would have been redacted, but I have to say I'm incredibly glad that the information that was in the Labour leaks is now in the public domain. Because if what had happened was that just got buried and we never read those reports whatsoever in any form, I think that would have been a real travesty in terms of understanding what happened over the past 5 years. Ash, do you have any comments on this? It did break sort of just a couple hours before we went live.
Yeah, no, I do have some thoughts on this. One, it seems to me that the Labour Party don't really have a leg to stand on. When there was an attempt by people named within the report to bring charges against, not charges, make a complaint against the Labour Party in court, one of the things that was said by the Labour Party in court was, we simply don't have enough evidence to determine who it was who released this report into the public domain. So the fact that now they're considering making, 5 named accusations seems to be a real volte-face from what they'd been saying before. And then I just want to, talk about what was detailed within the report and the failure of the Labour Party to actually respond to it in any meaningful way. What was detailed in that report was that there was a concerted campaign of factional wrecking, that there was misuse of party resources in order to essentially throw a general election and stop Jeremy Corbyn from becoming Prime Minister, and that there was also a culture of bullying and really directed nastiness at Black Labour MPs on the part of Labour Party staffers, as well as documented incidences of Islamophobia. Now, the Ford report was supposed to be the kind of independent investigation which could go through some of the claims, determine what's true, and then be released. That's been kicked into the long grass. So it's wild to me that the Labour Party clearly doesn't want to have any more conversations about this leaked report, to the extent that they've essentially, forgotten about this Ford inquiry. They're like, Ford? Who? Huh? Never heard of him. But are risking dredging all of this up again simply because they want to continue a kind of factional warfare. No wonder they've named Seamus Milne and Carrie Murphy, 2 of the most senior figures in Jeremy Corbyn's operation. It's a concerted attempt to sort of nail the Corbynite left into a tomb and, add more insult to injury. It's very naked, in my opinion, wrecking and factionalism has got nothing to do either with dealing with what was made public in that report, or in fact doing the kind of smart comms thing and going, let's just pretend none of this shit ever happened.
Yeah, it seems pretty vindictive and vicious to me, as has, most of the operations in the Labour Party since Keir Starmer became leader. I'm sure we'll be going back to stories of people in Labour HQ being bastards in many shows to come. Before we go on to the next story, as I'm sure you're aware, Novara Media is only possible because of the donations of our very, very kind supporters. If you are already a regular donor, thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. If not, please consider going to novaramedia.com/support. As millions of families in Britain struggle with rising bills and fuel shortages, the Prime Minister has fled to a luxury villa in Marbella. Boris Johnson left for the trip in the same week the £20 cut to universal credit kicked into effect. Charities warn that the cut will push 300,000 children into poverty. As well as the timing of the trip, eyebrows have been raised because it appears to have been courtesy of someone to whom Boris Johnson very recently gave a peerage. So that was the headline on the Daily Mail, only here for the peer. It was given to Boris Johnson courtesy of Zach Goldsmith. More on him in one moment. First of all, it does sound like it was a very nice pad, according to the Mirror. The property has its own helipad to make sure VIP holidaymakers can arrive and leave without being seen, as well as 2 pools and a tennis court. The main house is set on 3 levels and sleeps 13, while a smaller luxury villa that sleeps up to 10 people and includes 5 ensuite bedrooms can be rented separately. As I say, the property is owned by Zach Goldsmith. He's the former Tory MP who ran a racist campaign against Sadiq Khan in 2016. He was made a peer by Boris Johnson after losing his seat in the 2019 general election. This morning, Kay Burley challenged Tory Minister Damien Hinds on the awkward optics of Boris Johnson's break.
Do you accept, though, on any level, that the optics are not good when people are turning up the heat and can't really afford it at home and the PM's sunning himself on a lounger in Spain?
So, look, I would come back to what I just said. I mean, he remains in charge, right? He's the Prime Minister. I think it's also right and important, actually. It's actually important for him and his family. It's also important for the rest of us, actually, for the whole country, that the Prime Minister does get to have some family time, does get to have a break.
That was Damien Hinds saying everyone needs a break. Unfortunately, I don't think he commented on Zach Goldsmith. Ash, I want your take on this. Labour are sort of taking different lines. I saw there was one person who I think was in the shadow cabinet saying they don't really mind if Boris Johnson takes a holiday. I know Bridget Phillipson has said this is the government going, saying we're out of office at a moment of national crisis because of the shortages, etc. Do you think any outrage has been committed here?
Look, I think that when it comes to the issue of politicians going on holiday, it's always kind of opposition fodder. If Labour were in government and the Prime Minister went on holiday, really no matter what time of year, maybe if it was in August and during the silly season and it had been fairly quiet, there wouldn't be so much outrage, but there usually is some kind of story about it. So Prime Minister's holidays really up to Boris Johnson had to be quite carefully stage managed. So prime ministers wouldn't want to be seen going on a holiday anywhere that nice, anywhere that fancy, preferably not too far afield, because that would make you look like you're out of touch with people. Boris Johnson comes along, he's like, fuck it, Mustique. Fuck it, helipad villa near Marbella. I do not give a shit about you people. I want my nice holiday, my spa treatments, my 5-star meals, That's what I'm interested in. And so I think what that speaks to is the degree to which Boris Johnson is almost more of a Berlusconi kind of figure. So the usual standards of accountability have never really seemed to touch him in any way. He's been able to kind of flout the normal rules of reputation management and in a way embrace being kind of rich and obnoxious. So I think in terms of whether or not this is going to be an effective Labour attack line, I would say, well, no. Because if it wasn't for Mystique, then why would it be for this? And it kind of seems like an opposition bleating like, oh, you've left during a crisis. Well, we've been in a state of perpetual crisis really for the last 5 years. It does feel like you could have said that at any other point since the referendum. Like, this is a really bad time to go on holiday. Perhaps that speaks more to the state of British politics than it does about actual prime minister's decisions. Where I think the outrage is, the fact that you've had this, very shady business of who paid for the Mustique trip. And I think there is still some things which are unclear about, well, who paid for the travel when it came to Boris Johnson going to Marbella. And then the other thing is, did you know that Zach Goldsmith was that rich? Because I knew that he was rich, but I didn't know he was helipad rich. And that just kind of blows my mind that you've got somebody who owns a helipad, who has this villa that they don't even live in most of the time. And it is bigger than some, blocks of flats that I've lived in. And he was like, yeah, I want to be London mayor. You know, I can speak to the people. No one who is that rich has any business being in politics. Just shut the fuck up and enjoy your money in peace over there. I don't want to hear about you in politics.
He's silly rich in the way that most people who are silly rich at the moment are, which is that his dad was a billionaire. So his dad was a billionaire businessman and financier, James Goldsmith. I suppose they'd say that, you know, maybe they rent out the property, you know, they've just got an Airbnb on the side. It just happens to have a helipad. But no, these guys are fucking filthy rich. Apologies. Didn't mean to swear there. Right, let's go on to our next story. Oh, have we got some comments first? Fabulous. Perfect. Red Baron with a $5. Boris Johnson can act like this because the opposition is so weak. We should introduce ranked choice voting ASAP. Interesting. I'd be in favour of ranked choice voting. That is, so ranked choice voting, for anyone who's unaware, if I'm getting this correct, is that instead of just voting Labour or Tory, you know, you don't just get one vote in your elections, you get two. So you can vote with your heart, number one, and then you vote sort of very practically in number two. So if you're in a constituency where it's a Labour Tory marginal, but you want the Greens, you can say Greens 1, Labour 2, and that will give those third parties a chance because no one will be terrified to vote for them anymore if they live in marginals. So it would be a very positive thing, and that means we wouldn't be stuck with the choice that we currently have. Red Baron with a $5. Labour want to lose on purpose. Love the content, Ash and Michael. Thank you very much. And I'm kind of suspicious that they do. Well, they definitely wanted to lose on purpose when Jeremy Corbyn was in power. I think now they're a bit more ambivalent. So when Jeremy Corbyn was in power, it was 100% we want these bastards to lose because we want to take the party back, and actually we prefer Boris Johnson to Jeremy Corbyn anyway. Now I think they're in a sort of win-win situation where, say, if we win, great, and we'll have Keir Starmer as Prime Minister. If we lose, doesn't really matter. We'll blame the left and we've got the party anyway. So I think that's the sort of strategic dynamic they're setting up for themselves. Obviously, if you've got the press on side, it's easier to have these win-win situations. Very depressing. But it's still worth fighting back. Oscar L with a $5 says, I don't want to work from home. I want a 4-day week. Why not have both, Oscar? Or work 4 days a week. As I say, I think everyone should just absolutely have the choice themselves. Also, thanks to Baz Cams and Roger for donating via the Super Chat. Final story. The Metropolitan Police have confirmed they will not be taking further action with regard allegations of sexual assault levelled at Prince Andrew. The investigation into Andrew, which was reopened in August, concerned claims made by Virginia Giuffre. She is currently lodging a civil case against the prince in New York. Giuffre claims that convicted paedophile Jeffrey Epstein and his confidant Ghislaine Maxwell forced her to have sex with Andrew on multiple occasions when she was 17. One of those assaults, according to Giuffre, was at the London home of Ghislaine Maxwell. That's where, according to Giuffre, this photo was taken. Prince Andrew, for his part, denies all the allegations. Announcing their decision, the Metropolitan Police said the following. As a matter of procedure, Metropolitan Police Service officers reviewed a document released on August 2021 as part of a US civil action. This review has concluded, and we are taking no further action. Ash, I presume Prince Andrew will take this as some sort of vindication. The Met Police have said, we don't have enough evidence to investigate what might have happened within our jurisdiction. Do you think it would be too premature for him to breathe a sigh of relief, though?
Well, look, realistically, the Metropolitan Police was never going to come to any other decision. It would be, sorry, the cat has decided he wants to be a star again. Realistically, the police were not going to come to any other decision. It would be unprecedented to, say that, look, we are actively investigating a senior royal for a sexual offence and for upholding what has been put in a civil claim outside of UK jurisdiction. It really would be unprecedented. The Metropolitan Police are, it's a political beast as well as, part of the criminal justice system and maintains its own power and authority through proximity to other parts of the establishment and keeping them on side. So they were never going to do anything different. But this doesn't mean that Prince Andrew is in the clear by any stretch of the imagination. One, him and his lawyers still have until the 29th of October to respond to Virginia Giuffre's suit. Two, one of the things that they're banking on is that there will be something in the 2009 settlement between Giuffre and Epstein which would insulate Prince Andrew, or could be interpreted to insulate him from any civil claim pertaining to Giuffre and Epstein. And even if, say, the civil claim is upheld, even if the kind of Hail Mary chance of hoping for a rescue by some detail that's in this Epstein-Giuffre suit, they would then have to work out how they would either recover damages, impose whatever penalty the court came up with in the US, and then still that's not the same thing as a criminal action. So I think that what is more meaningful here is the amount of negative publicity that this ongoing case is attracting. According to a piece which came out in the Sunday Times, other senior royals, most notably Prince Charles and Prince William, consider Prince Andrew a liability. They don't think that his judgment is good. They see him as a net negative for the institution and resilience of the monarchy. It just so happens that Prince Andrew enjoys an awful lot of support from his mother, the Queen, who is said to be, financially supporting him at this time and, personally financing his defense against the claims brought by Virginia Giuffre. But the monarchy is headed for a crisis of legitimacy when the Queen does die, and that's why Charles and William are looking over their shoulders and going, well, how much can we afford to be seen to be closing ranks around Andrew when this guy is, clearly an idiot, clearly his judgment can't be trusted. We saw that with the Emily Maitlis Newsnight interview, and increasing sections of the public are turning against him because they find that the claims which are brought by Virginia Giuffre completely credible.
I'm glad you brought up the role of the Queen in this, because it links to the next clip I want to show, which involves, I think, or puts on show anyway, how ridiculously we discuss this in Britain, or how ridiculously elites discuss this whole issue in Britain. This was Nick Ferrari on Question Time, speaking last week in response to a question about whether Prince Andrew should go to the USA to face cross-examination.
This is how I'm going to sum it up. The Queen has been through the most trying period of her life, I would imagine. Not that long ago, she lost her consort of goodness knows how many decades. She's also got the issues of one of her grandsons living in California, which we're also going to park there. I just think it's a terrible shame that as this woman continues to serve in a way that I don't know we will ever see again in this country, that she is blighted by problems such as this. So whether it takes him to go to New York, to Washington, to do a video link, whatever it takes to put this out of the way, to let the Queen power on and do the job that I think she happens to do particularly well, I would urge him to do that.
Okay. I sort of introduced that in terms of the ridiculous way that elites discuss this issue, which, by the way, is a serious allegation about sexual assault, right, of someone who has been allegedly trafficked. Really, really serious issue. And Nick Ferrari gives that speech, which I think completely belittles the issue, because he makes it all about how relaxed the Queen can be. The real victim here is the Queen, who, as Ash said, gave loads of support to Prince Andrew. She hasn't exactly showered herself in glory in this situation. But not only did he say something, to my mind, completely ridiculous, but the audience lapped it up. Everyone in that audience really clapped for Nick Ferrari there. And there were periods in that same episode, we actually showed them on Friday in relation to the cut to universal credit, where there were lots of people who had quite progressive views in that audience, but still they thought the real victim of all of this was the Queen. Ash, did you find that clip as depressing as I did?
Yeah, absolutely depressing. And it's also these contortions to defend the Queen as a sovereign and be really invested in this kind of, decades in the making myth which has become layered and entwined with her. So she's not just, the head of state. She's not just this constitutional figure, but there's something about her which is like the grandmother of a nation. So it's inviting us to feel this very familial sense of attachment to what is essentially a nonagenarian aristocrat. And, appealing to her experience of grief, which I'm sure was absolutely devastating, just as it would be for anyone else. And I think in quite a cynical way, leveraging that to draw attention away from the fact that, well, maybe if it turns out that Prince Andrew did all the things that Virginia Giuffre is alleging that he did, that he committed a sex offence, that the victim in question was a victim of sex trafficking and 17 years old at the time, that maybe if he did do those things, they were done because of his role as a senior member of the royal family. The levels of impunity and power and access that grants him are not in spite of it. So it's a way, I think, of, trying to tug on the heartstrings and distract from the fact that maybe Prince Andrew's position as a royal wouldn't be incidental to what's been alleged to have happened, but would have been central to it.
I mean, I think that is we've talked about this case before. I think that's the big issue both with Andrew and Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, which is that the story is always, were they able to get away with stuff because they were powerful, or did they do it, because they were powerful? Was that access because they were powerful? We've got a comment, Darren Alevi with a $5. Looks like Ghislaine Maxwell was just a bone thrown to us by the elites. I guess all those people in Epstein's ledgers will get away with it. Yes. I mean, who knows? That case will be very interesting to view. Obviously, Jeffrey Epstein didn't quite make it that far. He died suspiciously in prison. I think 50-50. Did he kill himself? Actually, less than 50. Come on. 60%, 70% they killed him. 30% he killed himself. Ghislaine Maxwell, let's see if she makes it that far. David Hull with a tenner, thank you very much. And a room with a view with a $5 donation. Thank you so much for that. Ash, any final thoughts before we head off tonight?
Ooh, a little bit earlier than usual. Well, maybe I would like to draw our viewers' attention to the special COP26 podcast series, which we just announced today, called Planet B. So our very own Dahlia has been very involved with putting it together. So a real treat. Keep your eyes out for that, and make sure you get your mitts on it when it's out for real, for real.
You're so good at this, Ash. That is going to be a great piece of content that I should have thought to shout that out. So I'm glad you did that there. It was fabulous as ever speaking to you on this Monday evening.
I loved it. I love these Monday evenings, Michael. They make me feel happy to be alive. I
do too. They're all I can't say they're all I look forward to, because I also look forward to Wednesday with Dalia Gabriel and Friday with Aaron Bastani. And on that note, we will be back on Wednesday at 7 p.m. You've been watching Tysky Sour on Novara Media. Good night.